When I first moved to China, I had no idea just how big the modern tea shop culture was here. 6 months later, and somehow stopping for a tea has become part of my weekly routine. But the more I tried, the more curious I became about the brands behind these drinks. There are hundreds of tea brands across China, so I decided to do a little digging and find out which ones are really leading the industry. And 5 brands kept coming up. So in today's video, I'll be trying their best-selling drinks and finding out what makes each brand unique, how they've managed to stand out, and why they've become so popular with people across China. Because there's a lot more behind these colorful cups than I first realized. So let's take a closer look at China's new style tea culture.
Tea has been around in China for thousands of years. The way in which people drink it today has changed so much. You can walk down any street in China and find such a different version of tea than it was a couple hundred years ago. Things have adapted and changed for the modern individual, such as things like cheese foam, tapioca beads, things like bits of fruit, milk. So what I've noticed that these tea brands have done is they've adapted the tea culture to fit into a more modern day life. We no longer have time to sit around and have a cup of tea that takes a little longer to brew. We need something that's more convenient, on the go, and also slightly more affordable.
The interesting thing is that China didn't have to convince people to drink tea. Tea was already deeply embedded in everyday life. But traditionally, drinking tea could be a much slower experience. It could involve ceremonies, sitting down, brewing the tea, and taking time to enjoy it.
So the question I keep asking myself is, how did one of China's oldest traditions become such a modern trend?
Let's talk about the brand that is making tea super accessible and convenient. No brand demonstrates it better than Mixue. Because it isn't trying to make tea feel more luxurious, it's making it more accessible. You can find Mixue almost everywhere in China, from major cities to much smaller towns and neighborhoods. By the end of 2025, it had almost 60,000 stores worldwide, with more than 55,000 of those in mainland China.
The drink I'm about to get is by far the most popular drink from Mixue. It's a lemonade iced tea, and this particular iced tea has sold around 9 billion times in 2024. That's roughly 25 million cups per day.
And this is where Mixue becomes really interesting, because the average drink is designed to cost around 6 RMB, roughly $1. Instead of tea being something you make time for, it has turned into something you can simply pick up on the way somewhere. You can grab a drink before work, order one through your phone, have one delivered, or stop at a tiny shop in your local neighborhood. That accessibility is a huge part of the brand's success. Modern tea brands have also learned how to make tea fit into a life that is moving much faster.
Finally got my lemonade iced tea, and I'm very excited to try it because this was by far one of the most popular drinks coming out of the shop. I'm going to give it a good shake because that's what I've seen everybody do. Grab my straw and hope that it's super refreshing. It's a very warm evening in Zobo tonight, so hopefully it's the perfect drink. That is like the perfect lemonade iced tea. It's quite sweet, very lemon forward, almost like lemon rind forward, which is quite tart, and oh, it's delicious. They did offer different levels of sweetness. I went for less sugar to almost no sugar, but it went up to like 7 points of sugar, and even the less sugar is very sweet. This is something that I probably wouldn't have every day, even though that is pretty much the concept that they're going for at Mixue, but it's delicious and something that I would crave on a super hot day. It gives me summer vibes. It's almost like the lemonade you would make growing up as a kid that you would sell on the side of the road to make pocket money. It's exactly that. What Mixue does is they take it to the absolute extreme, make it convenient, make it cheap, and make it everywhere so that it becomes part of everybody's routine every day. But not every modern tea brand is trying to make things cheaper.
Chagee opened its first store in Yunnan in 2017, inspired by ancient Tea Horse Road and the history of tea trading across China. And from the beginning, the idea was quite different. Rather than treating tea as just another flavor to add to a sweet drink, Chagee built its menu around tea itself. Whole tea leaves are brewed into drinks with varieties like jasmine green tea and oolong.
They are not representing themselves as a bubble tea shop, but rather a tea house, and that distinction is very important.
Because Chagee is taking something very traditional, the appreciation of different teas and putting it into a format that feels completely modern, you can walk into one of these beautifully designed stores, order a jasmine green tea latte, and have it made fresh in minutes. It's still takeaway tea, but the experience feels much more intentional, and Chagee has been incredibly successful with this approach. By the end of 2025, the brand had 7,453 tea houses across China and overseas, including more than 7,100 in China. It also had more than 238 million registered members. And what's particularly interesting is that Chagee didn't just grow by constantly adding new flavors.
This drink here, the jasmine green tea, they've sold over 100 million cups in 1 year, which is absolutely crazy. All right, give me a try. That is super fresh, super fragrant, but at the same time super delicate. And you can see why Chagee is super famous for looking after their tea. It's all about top quality tea leaves, brewing it at the right temperatures, and you can taste it in the cup. You can taste that it has been properly brewed, it's not bitter, it's super floral, and you really are getting that beautiful jasmine green tea flavor. And what's really interesting is that Chagee has actually formulated this specific tea over 10 times just to get the correct flavor and get the right tea profile to make sure that the experience is consistent for their customers.
China already has a huge tea culture. The opportunity wasn't to create a new one, it was to find new ways for people to experience it.
Now it's time to head on to the next tea brand, and this tea brand decided to change up the rules. Tea came out with something super bizarre that at the time everyone was thinking, what? This is crazy. They came out with a tea with cheese foam. Yeah, cheese foam. So the concept was, yes, it was tea with a thick, creamy layer of cheese foam on top. It had layers, it looked fantastic, and that's exactly what I'm gonna go and get right now.
Because Tea wasn't just creating a drink that tasted different, it was creating a drink that people wanted to photograph. And this is where social media becomes a really important part of the story. The drink had layers, it had texture, it had a recognizable cup, and suddenly buying a tea became something you could share. People weren't just drinking tea, they were posting about it.
All right, I found myself a lovely quiet spot in our local park, and I got a little takeaway from Tea. Now this is pretty much one of their famous drinks that put them on the map. What particularly put them on the map was the creamy, cheesy foam layer to their mix of teas. Now I got a grape flavor. They also do a jasmine green tea flavor. The lady recommended to me, definitely try this one. They sell between 400 and 500 of these a day just in that store alone. That just went everywhere. Ooh, that is certainly very different. Okay, so cheese foam. When you think cheese foam, you think, ew, cheese in a smoothie. But what this really is like a thick whipped cream almost, and it's slightly salty to the point where it's actually so complementary to something sweet that it's almost giving me lightly whipped mascarpone with double thick cream. Oh, that is totally get why this went viral. Oh my gosh, that's good. Oh, it's almost like, it reminds me so much of a grape slushy, but then with this creamy foam, it like tones it down, and it almost feels like you're having, oh, you know what it feels like? A trifle. Now, I know I've gone from grape slushy to a trifle, but that's exactly what it is. It's like you've taken this grape cherry jelly that's on a trifle, and then on the top of the trifle is you have the cream layer. It's like that. I've been so scared to try these drinks because of the cheese foam, but this has opened the doors for me. And that turned the brand into what China likes to call a Wahong brand, which is basically becoming famous due to the internet.
When Haiti opened its first Shenzhen flagship, queues became part of the experience. People were willing to wait for hours for a drink they had seen online. And that tells us something really important about the new tea industry. Product itself had become content. Haiti also understood that innovation didn't have to mean abandoning tea. In fact, many of its drinks still start with recognizable tea bases: jasmine, oolong, green tea, but then combine them with fresh fruit, milk, cheese foam, and completely new textures.
Instead of asking how do we get people to drink traditional tea, they asked how do we make tea so interesting that we get people to share it.
The result was a brand that blurred the line between food, fashion, design, and social media. By 2025, Haiti had grown to around 4,000 stores worldwide, showing just how far this idea had traveled from a tiny shop in Guangdong. But I think its biggest influence isn't actually the number of stores, it's what happened to the industry around it.
Suddenly, everyone started experimenting with new launches, new ingredients, new textures, matcha, cheese foam, new fruits. But it wasn't all about what the drink tasted like, it was what it looked like too.
And that to me is the real turning point in modern Chinese tea culture, because we're no longer just talking about adapting tea to modern life, we're talking about using tea as a canvas for innovation. And once social media entered the equation, a drink could go from a product to a trend to a cultural moment almost overnight.
But China is a big country, and not everybody wants the same thing.
But innovation wasn't only about inventing the next crazy drink.
Another part of the revolution was a little bit more subtle. It was a company saying, well, not everyone likes the same thing, so let's make a massive menu that caters for everybody. And a great example is Panda.
Founded in Chengdu in 2008, Panda started in Sichuan, and that origin is important because China is enormous and there isn't one single Chinese palate. What people enjoy in Sichuan can be very different from what people want in Guangdong, Shanghai, or the north.
So what Panda did was they made a really extensive menu, and what they decided to do was create a menu that had different ingredients or celebrated different seasonal fruit. Really unique ingredient like what I've got in front of me. I've got is a soybean milk with a cheese foam on top with also soybean powder. Super delicate in flavor. That soybean almost gives it like a nuttiness to it, and the tea kind of like sings throughout it without it being overpowering. It's more definitely all about the milk.
So the menu itself becomes a way of responding to the country, and this is where Panda's scale becomes really impressive. By the end of 2025, it had around 8,000 stores across 354 cities in China. In 2025 alone, Panda launched 117 new products, and that's when you start to see just how different modern tea culture is from the traditional idea of tea. Traditional tea culture often places enormous value on consistency, the same tea, prepared carefully, respected for its particular character. And that might be one of the biggest reasons these brands have grown so quickly, is they aren't selling one version of Chinese tea culture, they're creating thousands of different ways to experience it.
So how do you make thousands of shops work like this? For a great example, you go to GoodMe.
By this point, you might be wondering, how do these companies actually make millions of drinks across thousands of stores while keeping them consistent? Because underneath the colorful drinks and trendy tea shops is something that looks much more like a technology company. GoodMe has invested heavily in technology to connect its stores, its equipment, its franchises, and supply chain. As of 2024, the company had more than 9,000 stores across China, but managing thousands of stores manually would be impossible. So GoodMe developed its own digital store management system. One example is a proprietary automatic tea brewer. Instead of relying entirely on an employee to decide exactly how long the tea should be brewed, the system can receive centralized brewing parameters and automatically adjust the brewing process. So the technology is helping to make sure a cup of tea in one city tastes the same as a cup hundreds of kilometers away.
When you walk into GoodMe and order yourself a fruit tea, you are really just seeing the tip of the iceberg, because behind this one cup is data, software, cold chain logistics. It's actually mind-boggling. What I've got here is one of their most popular drinks, which is a mango and pomelo milk tea. I'm very excited to try it because I do love the mango fruit tea. Oh, wow, that is so delicious. Slightly sweet,
milky, and then obviously you've got all these lovely bits from chewy little, like almost like tapioca, sago type beads, and you've got bits of mango, bits of pomelo. Wow, super refreshing, but also like such a treat. The pomelo adds like a very bitter grapefruit flavor to it, and it's such a nice contrast just to break through that sweetness, because it can be a little bit sweet. And Guming has invested seriously into the people behind the technology. The company had more than 340 engineers as of September 2024, which is described as the largest information technology team in China's freshly made beverage industry at the time.
Think about that for a minute, a tea brand with hundreds of engineers, and I think this makes Guming the perfect way to end off our journey. But since this entire video has been talking about how much tea has changed, what if it's not about the tea that's changed inside the cup, but rather behind the cup?
Traditional tea culture depended heavily on craftsmanship, experience, and the individual person preparing the tea. Modern tea culture still needs people, but now these people are supported by algorithms, automated equipment, digital ordering systems, data, and highly sophisticated supply chain. Technology is allowing these brands to take something incredibly local and personal and reproduce it thousands of times a day across an entire country.
Instead, it took something thousands of years old and adapted it to the modern culture and to what people expect. Affordability, convenience, personalization, social media, as well as heritage, and finally, technology.
The result isn't just a new way of drinking tea, it's completely a new way of experiencing it.
And that brings us to the end of today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you've learned something new about Chinese tea culture, because I have learned so much through making this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!